February 8th, 2018. Madam Clerk, may we have a roll call, please?
Mayor Rick Mueller.
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Alicia Ash.
Present.
Councilmember Bob Blanchard.
Here.
Councilmember Gwen Calhoun.
Present.
Councilmember Rachel Gray. Councilmember Craig Mount.
Present.
Councilmember Christine Wolf.
Present.
Mr. Mayor, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Ms. Adams. I'll just mention Ms. Gray is not yet back from her trip to Mississippi to visit Mom, so I'm sure we'll see her soon. Tonight, the invocation will be led by Father Greg Adolph of the St. Andrews the Apostle Catholic Church, and the pledge will be led by Mr. Mount. Would you please rise?
From the book of the prophet Habakkuk. For the vision is yet for an appointed time, but at the end it shall speak and not lie. Though it tarry, wait for it, because it will surely come. It will not tarry. Yes, it is for this vision that we call out this evening in trusting prayer, for vision that will stretch our narrowness to embrace your greatness, for vision that will allow us to see more and more clearly and to move beyond the shadows of fear or anxiety, for vision that gives us a future bright enough to strengthen us for the tasks of the present. Lord our God, bless with this vision our mayor and city council, our city staff and employees, that a spirit of wisdom and understanding, a spirit of collaboration and mutuality might lift and open their spirits. We pray for these men and women that you have called to this particular time and place to be servant leaders in our community, that there would be no grandstanding, but standing grand in their shared sense of responsibility, that there would be no catering to interests, but constant interest in serving, that their wise speech would naturally flow from deep and careful listening. We ask you to bless them, because in doing so, you will be blessing us, who have entrusted them with this great arena of service. And may you be glorified in all that is begun and will be concluded in the vision that will not tarry. In Jesus' precious name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please be seated. Thank you, Father Greg. And thank you, Mr. Mount. We now move to item number 1, the acceptance of the agenda. Mr. Blanchard.
Mr. Mayor, I move that the agenda for the regular city council meeting of February 8th, 2018 be approved.
Second.
It's moved second. Any comments or discussion? Seeing none, I'll call for the question. All those in favor? Opposed? It's unanimous. Thank you very much. We'll now move on to the city manager's report. Mr. Patuchik.
Thank you, Mayor Mueller, members of the council. Your next regularly scheduled work session, our normal update, will be on the 20th of February, 3 p.m. here in the council chambers. And a reminder that on Monday, the 19th of February, city offices will be closed in observance of President's Day. We'll be on our holiday refuse and recycle schedule Tuesday through Friday with no special pickups on Wednesday. And just one project tonight, our airport fueling request for proposals was published on the 21st and will open, that date is wrong in mine, but should be open within the next few weeks. So then we'll have a pretty good handle on what our air fueling costs will be.
Any questions from Mr. Patuchik on this report? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and move on to item number 2. Ms. Wolf.
Mr. Mayor, I move that the consent agenda consisting of the City Council special meeting minutes of January 23rd, 2018, and regular meeting minutes of January 25th, 2018 be approved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any additions, deletions, corrections, discussion on those 2 items? Seeing none, I'll call for the question. All those in favor? Opposed? It's unanimous. Thank you very much. Next, we'll move on to a couple of public hearing items. Item number 3, Mr. Blanchard.
Mr. Mayor, I move that resolution 2018-012, Development Code Text Amendment, Articles 151.02 and 151.10, and declaring a 30-day record be approved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Before Mr. Pregler starts, we do have one member of the public that wishes to address us on this item, Mr. Lawley. And I think you've been here before, but it's been a while. If you come forward, you basically got 5 minutes to address us. And when we hit the 5-minute mark, I'll ask you to complete your remarks.
I only need 3 minutes and a half.
All right, I'll count that.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Thanks for allowing me a couple minutes of your time today. I know all of you know me, and I know who you are, but for the record, I'm Sean Lawley from Lawley Motors. I'm here tonight to ask you to give serious consideration to raise the sign height from 10 feet to 15 feet. A couple of you folks on the council are business owners, so I'm hoping that you know how important a sign is to your business. I know you've all been working on sign code variations and options for years, and I think that a new 15-foot height limit would be a great gesture to us business owners. Specifically in my business, when you have several hundred feet of frontage, a 10-foot sign can get overlooked very easily, especially in my business, a business displaying cars. In addition to my individual request for a taller sign, I'm also aware of others who would like to have had a taller sign. For example, the Richards family who own the McDonald's restaurants, Les and Kathy Orchakowski who own Ace Hardware, Cliff Allison who owns Cochise Motorsports, Barry from Sierra Cycles, Lowe's, and Home Depot would like to have a taller monument sign. The Canyon Vista Medical Center has requested a taller sign. Brian Barkdahl with American Southwest Credit Union would love to have a taller sign. As his sign sits now, I don't know if you know this, but he only has his initials on the sign. There's not enough room for his whole name, but just his initials. So the out-of-business Lucky Wishbone that still sits empty today wanted a larger sign so they could compete with Kentucky Fried Chicken up the street. I talked with Frank Morrow from First West Properties. Both Culver's and the new car wash on the highway desired a taller monument sign. I spoke to Mike from High Desert Sign. And when he's asked by businesses for a taller monument sign, he just informs them of the current height code, and it just can't work. So what all these businesses have in common, we're all major retailers with major franchises to represent. We're all anchor businesses in this community, and we all collect a huge amount of sales tax, which unfortunately by this council, I believe is widely unrecognized. Mr. Mayor and members of the council, this town's struggling. This town's losing business at an alarming rate, businesses. Drive around this community and look at the more than 1 million square feet of vacancy. The business owners who are here and who have invested in this community deserve some outside-of-the-box thinking and not the old time, that's the way it is because that's the way it's always been thinking, based on a failed beautification effort from years past. We need every advantage we can to keep the folks here buying local. Nice, national, recognizable franchise signs are a sign of good economic development and a vibrant community. It's concerning that the folks sitting in front of me want things to change, but they don't want to change anything. So I would guess that most of you sitting out here don't even know how the original sign codes came about. How crazy is that? So opposing a new sign code and not knowing when or why the old sign code has passed. So some of these sign codes, they predate me, and I've been here 23 years. So Mr. Mayor and Council, 10 feet to 15 feet is 5 feet. It's not Las Vegas or Times Square. It's 5 feet. Please listen to the business people of this community. They're not here, as I think they've given up on this process. So I'm here to speak on behalf of the businesses that I just mentioned. So going back to my specific request, the sign that I am requesting, is a beautiful monument sign from Nissan. It's not a hand-painted sign on a piece of plywood. The sign will enhance the overall look of Fry Boulevard, the same as the dealerships that I've invested millions of dollars in have done and will continue to do so. So I thank you again for your time and your serious consideration, and I am available for questions for a minute and a half.
Any questions, Mr. Lawley? That doesn't count against your time. Any questions for Mr. Lawley? Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Lawley, do you have some type of indication that taller signs bring in more business?
Well, it's not necessarily that they bring in more business, but they make your business more noticed. And as I said, specific to my business, and I only bring specific to my business up because When I built my Honda store, I was limited at my Honda sign of, I think it was 10 feet. The problem is my Honda site sat like 2 or 3 feet off the crown of the road, so it sits down, and then I did get a little bit of a variance, and I'll have to say I appreciate that. But the problem is the sign that I was supposed to get, you could park a car in front of it, and it couldn't be seen. So do I think a taller sign gets you more business? No, I think that your business gets you more business, and you get more noticed with a taller sign.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Lawley, is there we were talking about this earlier downstairs, but if it's 10 feet now and then it goes to 15 feet, would you foresee or project, with your experience and expertise, a need or a requirement for somebody to go to 20 or 25 in the future?
Give me an inch and I'll take a foot. Sure. No, I don't think so. I just, as I drive around and I see rural areas, and I know that some of the sign codes in the city have been pretty strict with regards to sign height. But when you go to some of these rural towns, they have taller signs. Even like highway signs. And go to Safford, it's something else. So trust me, everybody, I don't want the town to look, ugly and stuff. But I don't think that a professional franchise sign is ugly. So to answer your question, no, I would not come back here. 15 feet is plenty. The only reason I'm using 15 feet is because that's the next sign size that Nissan has. They don't have one from the one that I originally did to like 13 feet or something like that. So there's just not an option.
Thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions? Well, thank you, Mr. Lawley. We appreciate your input.
Thank you.
Okay. Now, this is in fact a public hearing item, so we're getting ready to open it for 30 days. But Jeff, will you give us a staff report, please?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Mueller, members of council. Staff is proposing a number of amendments to Development Code Section 151.10 sign regulations. The impetus for many of the text changes is compliance with the Supreme Court decision Reed versus Town of Gilbert, which found that sign codes throughout the country needed to be content neutral and provide equal protection for all sign types. Therefore, staff is revising the definition of many of the signs by structure type rather than having specialized standards for specific events. For example, signs previously defined as garage sale signs or open house signs, which infer that the individual read the content, are now defined as banner signs or A-frame signs, again, describing the structure of the sign type, not necessarily the content. Secondly, the city is aware of the challenges for businesses in the current state of the economy and therefore wanted to include sign standards that support the local economy. The focus of the remaining amendments recommends increases in advertising opportunities while providing safety and aesthetic standards. So let's start off with the changes to Article 151.02 definitions. Again, the amendments in this section include a number of new definitions for signs that are compliant with Reed versus Town of Gilbert, meaning the signs are content neutral. There are also new definitions in this section which reflect the increase in permitted sign types. And then Article 151.12 sign regulations, number of amendments to this section. The first one removes the exempt sign section. Many of the signs referenced in this section are not content neutral and therefore are in violation of Reed versus Town of Gilbert. The Second Amendment renames a temporary sign section to portable signs. Temporary signs infer that an event is temporary, which requires the individual to read the sign. Again, to be content neutral, this section is proposed to be renamed. Next, the portable sign section was reorganized to make the standards more easily understandable and provides for additional allowances for signs such as exempting signs that cannot be viewed from a public street, allowing A-frames, and extending the length of banner signs from 70 days a year to 90 days. The standards for political signs were removed, and a reference was made to the state law regulating political signs. The next amendment relates to the prohibited sign section. The exemption language relating to the reader board signs has been removed because it currently allows special provisions for specific uses. Exemptions with specific sign categories such as this have been eliminated, again, to comply with Reed versus Town of Gilbert. Another amendment relates to the height of permanent freestanding signs, as was mentioned earlier. The current code allows a maximum height of freestanding signs within commercial zoning districts of 10 feet. Staff is proposing an amendment that would increase the maximum height of freestanding signs to 15 feet when located adjacent to arterial roadways, such as Fry Boulevard and the state highways. The maximum height will remain 10 feet along collector and local streets. In a related amendment, the placement of all freestanding signs shall be set back 5 feet from any property line to eliminate conflicts with pedestrian and vehicular traffic on sidewalks and roadways. Next, the maximum total of wall signage for commercial buildings is currently calculated by determining the vertical length of the building frontage and multiplying by 1.5. Staff is proposing to increase the multiplier from 1.5 to 2, which will provide additional wall signage per business. Freestanding signs for multi-dwelling uses are currently allowed to have a maximum sign area of 32 square feet if one-sided or 16 square feet if double-sided. Staff is recommending an amendment that would allow a maximum sign area of 32 square feet for a double-sided sign, which is consistent with sign area for commercial freestanding signs. Other amendments including increasing the height and size of permitted conditional uses in residential zoning districts, relocating and renaming home-based business signs and directional signs are other additional amendments. The Planning and Zoning Commission held a public hearing on the amendments on January 16th, 2018. There were no public comments at the meeting. The Commission did vote unanimously to approve with a vote of 5-0. Staff has provided copies of the amendments to the Chamber of Commerce, local sign companies, and local realtors. The city did receive a number of public comments since the Tuesday work session, all related to the proposal to increase the sign height for freestanding signs, going to 15 feet. I know that Mr. McLaughlin may have some additional comments he wanted to make on the proposed amendment.
Yeah, given the discomfort that was expressed at the work session and the input that we received subsequently, we've prepared an alternate recommendation for your consideration that would further delineate the standard beyond arterial roadways and tailor it to encompass, the highway commercial uses that you see along State Road 90 and 92, which are the faster streets in town, as well as the general commercial properties along Fry Boulevard east of Coronado. We understand that the city's vision, long-term vision, is to try to create more of a Main Street retail environment filled with mom and pop type uses along the west end of town. And, as it evolves into a more walkable, pedestrian-oriented district, I concur that perhaps a 10-foot height limit on signage would be more appropriate in that area. And yesterday I just learned, looking at the Lehman Academy project, that Wilcox Drive is classified in the general plan as an arterial roadway, which surprised me given the volume is only 3,000 vehicles per day. Typically the threshold is 10,000 and above for arterial roadway. So we have some cleanup work to do with our traffic circulation map and the assignment of the classification standards in our general plan. We'll be working on that down the road. So, as a way to, again, further tailor the taller signs to the faster roadways, the highway-oriented commercial uses, perhaps, impose or tailor the standard on a geographic basis to encompass only the state highways and Fry Boulevard east of Coronado would be our alternate recommendation for you to consider.
Any other questions, discussion? Yes, sir.
And the businesses that were raised, excuse me, the Sierra Cycles, the hospital, the Lawley project, Ace Hardware, those are all within those highway-oriented commercial strips that I referenced in my recommendation.
And I just mentioned to you, I did talk with Jeff about the fact that we have arterials more than you would think.
Yeah.
In the community, and many of them go through and around residential areas that there's open space and place for businesses to operate. And again, the height of the sign is questionable. So further discussion. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I like the alternative approach. I think what it does is sends a clear message to those businesses that are in that area that are looking for that 15-foot sign. Based on what we have heard, what was maybe we were missing during the work session, but we have gotten feedback since then. But I also think it also helps protect and address the concerns of the other citizens from the other feedback that we got, which is that we're not simply going to just open up everything to the larger signs. So I think that in the absence of being able to make everybody happy, we find a good compromise. And I think this is a good compromise that allows us to protect the areas that need to be protected and allows the businesses that need it, that are already operating there, to come up to a new standard that won't exceed 15 feet.
Ma'am.
I was curious, I didn't see it in the code, but I may have missed it. Is there any change in the size of the width and height of the
No.
actual wordage?
None is proposed. So the current 32 square feet would stay in place.
Thank you.
I want to mention, too, we did have some comments from folks that were concerned about the luminescence or the light emission. And in fact, that has not changed. Then this doesn't change that part of the code. The only difference may be that it's 5 feet taller.
Right.
And I'm not sure that that's going to be a significant impact on light leakage into the environment. So I don't really see that as a major concern. I think our light code is pretty well taken care of. Ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I watched the work session on Tuesday, so I realized I'm in the minority here, but I actually had no issues with the resolution or the 15-foot amendment. I think it's a relatively small change that we should accommodate for.
Okay. So what we're doing tonight is declaring it open for a public record. Any other comments? All right, then, I'll call for the question. All those in favor? 30-day record, yeah. Opposed? It's unanimous. Thank you very much, and we appreciate your comments tonight. And Jeff, we appreciate your work. We now go to item number 4, Ms. Ash.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move that Resolution 2018-013, Development Code Text Amendment, Articles 151.06, and declaring a 30-day public record be approved.
Second. It's been moved and seconded. Mr. Preckler.
Thank you, Mr. Mueller, Mayor Mueller, members of council. The city currently has a number of standards for commercial communication towers. However, there are no clear standards that regulate the installation of amateur radio antennas. This confusion prompted members of the local Amateur Radio Association to contact the city, asking for clarification between commercial communication and amateur radio standards. Since there was confusion, AMBT has received complaints in the past regarding the installation of amateur radio antennas within residential zoning districts. It was decided that the city would create standards specifically addressing amateur radio antennas. Now, staff worked with members of the Amateur Radio Association to ensure that proposed standards were practical and feasible for the antenna installations. Staff received an email yesterday stating that the proposed amendments were acceptable to the Amateur Radio Association. Staff is proposing amendments that define amateur radio antennas and also provide safety and aesthetic standards. In addition, staff is recommending review processes be established that defines permitting requirements. Specifically, a building permit would only be required when antennas are installed with permanent mounting or support or have a base diameter more than 2.5 inches. Further, a conditional use permit will be required when the height of the antenna exceeds 70 feet in height or the base diameter exceeds 12 inches. Now, in addition to the amendments related to the amateur radio antennas, staff is also proposing clarifications to the commercial communication tower standards. Excuse me. With the approval of a separate ordinance defining standards for communication towers in the right-of-way, language needs to be amended in this section to remove references to communication towers in the right-of-way with a citation to the applicable code section included. The Planning and Zoning Commission held a public hearing on the amendments on January 16, 2018. There were no public comments at the meeting. The Commission voted to unanimously approve the amendments with a 5-0 vote. Subsequent to the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting, staff did meet with representatives from the local Amateur Radio Association who provided comments regarding the amendments. So based on that discussion, the amendments before you today are a combination of those comments with the Amateur Radio Association. So apart from the comments from the association, there are no additional public comments that have been received. That concludes staff's report.
Questions, comments from council? Did this go before P&Z as well?
Yes, it did.
Okay, and they approved it?
Unanimously approved it, 5-0.
Okay, I
correct.
guess I missed that. All right. Again, this is for the 30-day comment period. Any questions, discussion? I'll call for the question. All those in favor? Opposed? It's unanimous. Thank you very much. We now go to new business. And item number 5, Mrs. Calhoun.
Mr. Mayor, I move that ordinance 2018-001, amendments to the City Code of Ordinances, Title IX, General Regulations, Chapter 92, and declaring an emergency be approved.
It's been moved and seconded. Before I ask Mr. McLaughlin to address this issue, we have one member of the public, Mr. DiCarlo, who would like to address us. Sir, you've been here before. You know the rules. I won't have to repeat them.
Good evening, Council, Mr. Mayor, Council, staff. I rest before you today because, fortunately for you, I can give you some expert opinions on this stuff. I was an electronics technician in submarines for 20 years. I was Sailor of the Year on board a nuclear-powered submarine, and I wasn't nuclear-powered trained. Electronic radiation was my forte. This is what I did, other than navigating a submarine, which cost $4 billion. But other than that, let's go here to this, if I can lay this down here. I've made some circles. Oh, you can't hardly see them. They're circles, right? If you can see them here.
Maria, we
Can you get the overhead turned on? There we go.
Can you see that?
Yeah.
Imagine it a little bit. All right, so we have an antenna right here. And these antennas on the west side of town are in the public right-of-way, which are in people's backyards where we used to pick up trash. We've changed that, right? So the proposal is these communication antennas, which broadcast electromagnetic radiation in a pattern outward in people's backyards. If you look at the transportation center located on our arterial of Wilcox Boulevard, you'll see a communications tower there that has a big sign, more or less says, don't hang out here. You're gonna get microwaved if you do. Why would we want to enable, I understand this is a state law coming up, but why would we want to allow the state to plant electromagnetic radiation emitting units that are used to go to our cell phones so we know they hit them on the ground? All these radio waves cut through you. They go right through you just like nuclear radiation. When they cut through you, they slice your cells, forcing them to divide and grow prematurely sometimes. When you do that, sometimes you end up with fringes on the edges, right? Those fringes on the edges our body usually removes, and we go to the bathroom and get rid of them. But sometimes they don't all come off. That's considered a mutation. And I'm not a medical doctor, but a mutation in a cell ends up being something bad. So in essence, what we're doing, the state is planting most likely cancer-causing antennas in people's backyards. Now we're going to say we don't have any proof from the CDC, but let me tell you something about the CDC and my level of trust for them. When I got discharged from the Navy, I was receiving 90 pills of opioids in the mail from the Veterans Administration. They told me cannabis doesn't have any medical properties. Well, I tell you what, I probably wouldn't be here if I hadn't paid the tax to get the cannabis, because I would have overdosed, most likely, on opioids, based upon the opinions of the CDC, the people that are providing you the guidance on electromagnetic radiation. Do you have any questions? I'd be happy to answer them. I hope I made sense.
Questions? Thank you, Mr. DiCarlo.
Yes, sir.
And now, could we have the staff report, Mr. McLaughlin?
Mr. Mayor, members of council, the ordinance before you implements House Bill 2365, which was signed into law and became effective on August 9th of last year. The bill allows wireless providers to install and operate small cells and related equipment in city rights-of-way and public easements. Cities and towns are required to establish and make available rates, fees, and terms that are consistent with the new legislative requirements by the end of this week. Thus, the emergency ordinance provision is included. Small wireless facilities are smaller, more targeted, and more numerous than traditional cell towers. Wireless carriers have found that while macro cells are great for wider area coverage for voice services, they're not as efficient for data services. The closer the antenna is to the device trying to connect to it, the less interference there will be and the better the connection for the data services. In short, small cells are used to fill in coverage gaps to build a denser network. Small wireless facilities are limited in size to 6 cubic feet for the antennas and 28 cubic feet for the wireless equipment that is required to send and receive radio signals to the site. They are typically co-located on existing utility poles. The law exempts from zoning review any new or replacement or modified utility pole that does not exceed the greater 40 feet or 10 feet above the tallest existing utility pole that is located within 500 feet of the proposed site, not to exceed 50 feet. Any new monopole, which is a wireless support structure that is not more than 40 inches in diameter at the ground level and has all the wireless facilities mounted on or contained inside the pole, would be permitted through the city's normal development review process. The law allows local governments to develop reasonable objective standards for the design of the small wireless site, but restricts cities from imposing separation standards from residential units or other small wireless sites. The proposed amendments contained in Resolution 2017-106 provide for the definition of terms, application and registration requirements, objective design and construction standards, required camouflaging and equipment to blend in with the surrounding environment, permit application, right-of-way use fees by facility type, and standards of review and approval and processing timeframes for wireless facilities to be placed in the public rights-of-way in accordance with the new law. The technical specifications and operational maintenance requirements were prepared by the city's engineering staff, who will be responsible for administering the provisions of this chapter to make sure the city's interests are protected. No public comment was received during the 30-day public comment period. And with that, I'll answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. McLaughlin. Questions from Mr. McLaughlin? Yes, sir.
Mr. McLaughlin, can you, the part about cities being restricted, can you read that sentence again?
From imposing separation standards from residential units.
Why? Why are we restricted from that?
Because that's what the law says.
I know, but do we know
I don't know the legislative intent. I guess to...
I don't want you to speculate if we don't know.
Well, typically, NIMBY arguments come up when wireless facilities are proposed. So my guess is the telecommunications industry lobbied to include that provision, so not to interfere with the permitting process on those type of applications.
Yes, ma'am.
And this bill is not unique to Arizona, by the way. I mean, there are multiple states across the country, including Florida, that has a bill that almost mirrors to the letter that was enacted by the Arizona legislature.
No doubt.
So this is a trend that is gaining steam across the country.
Yes, ma'am.
I just want to ask, is this the one that it is pretty much been, that we just have to approve because it's already been through the Arizona legislature? Is this the one that we were talking about?
Compelled by the state
that
law.
We have to do it?
To do it.
What happens if we don't? What's the state going to do?
They can withhold revenues now.
Yeah, now they can withhold revenues. They can also take us to court. Actually, an individual legislator can now take us to court. It doesn't have to be the Attorney General.
Okay.
As well as the provider.
As well as the provider can take us to court. Ma'am.
Oh, would you explain why this is declaring an emergency for this to be approved?
The state law has a deadline of this Friday to make the rates and rules enacted at the local level.
Okay. Anybody else? Any further discussion? I'll call for the question. All those in favor? Opposed? It carries 5-1. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. McLaughlin.
On the emergency ordinance basis, it's 3/5, and we have one. So that passes.
It passes.
Okay.
Yeah, we're good. Okay. We now move to item number 6, Mr. Mount.
It's a long one, Mayor. Bear with me.
It's okay.
Mr. Mayor, I move that ordinance 2018-002, city-initiated amendments to the Development Code, Article 151.19, Article 151.02, Section 151.22.006, Section 151.22.011, Administrative Modification, Section 151.04, Article 151.18, Article 151.02, Section 151.22.018, Section 151.04.015, Article 151.0.9, .09, Article 151.15, Article 151.05, and Article 151.08.007 be approved.
It's been moved and seconded. Mr. Pregler, may we have the staff report, please?
Thank you, Mayor Mueller, and members of council. The proposed code amendments are the result of the 2017-2018 work program, which provided a summary of proposed development code amendments that are to be completed by the end of the 2018 fiscal year. The focus of the amendments is to identify ways in which staff and the city can improve efficiencies, clarify requirements, and help residents and business owners move through the development process more easily. The work program was presented before the Mayor and City Council and the Planning and Zoning Commission at 2 separate work sessions in 2017. After receiving positive feedback from both reviewing bodies, staff proceeded with writing the amendments. Now, the proposed code changes focused on the following development code areas: water adequacy, manufactured home and RV standards, administrative modifications, fences and wall height, administrative site plan standards and submittal requirements, increased commercial heights in the general commercial zoning district, reduced building setbacks in the infill incentive district areas, low impact development, removal of Article 151.05 performance standards and relocation of the text to separate sections of the development code and city codes, and property maintenance enforcement. The amendments were presented to the Planning and Zoning Commission on October 17, 2017, who recommended approval with a vote of 4-1. The Mayor and City Council recommended the amendments to be approved for a 30-day public comment period on December 14, 2017. No additional public comments have been received within that 30-day public comment period. Should Council approve the amendments tonight, they will take effect within 30 days. I do want to remind Council also that although there is one staff memo for both ordinances, there are 2 separate resolutions. The first resolution would be simply for the Development Code amendments. The second resolution would be for the City Code amendments. So that does conclude staff's report.
So basically, we vote on the amendments and approve them, and then we vote to codify the city code.
Mr. Mayor, there's two separate.
I know they're 2 separate items.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So, for example, if you wanted
the second item, we take the ordinance and we codify it into the city code.
Mr. Mayor, for example, if you wanted to make any changes to the property maintenance section, that would be not this ordinance, but it'd be the next ordinance you'd make an amendment to.
Got it.
Got it. Okay.
Okay. Now that everybody's confused, we do have one member of the public that would like to address us tonight. Mr. Bear, sir.
Mayor, Council, thank you for letting me talk again. As you're aware, last time I was here, I was talking about our backyard situation and the wall height situation. I just wanted to say that I hope that you relax the regulations, because we don't live in a flat place, and many of us have properties that are at different elevations than our neighbors necessarily. I'm hoping that the code that you do implement will actually allow us to build a wall of a proper height that will put us on an equivalent basis with people who do live in a flat place. I actually have a neighbor here who is in the same situation as I am, to show support, and I just wanted to ask you to really think about it when you do vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Comments, discussion? Yes, sir.
I thought, Mr. Mayor, I'm sorry, but specific to that case, I thought some discussion was made at a previous council session where that specific use case was going to get resolved.
Yes, we're still working on the wall for the back.
Yes, my understanding is right now the city code only allows a 6-foot height. When we discussed it, I believe there was some discussion about raising it to an 8-foot height.
Yeah, and either raising the wall or raising the land on your property, basically.
Yes.
It's going to have to be on your property.
But I know that I'm not the only one in this situation, and actually I heard when Mr. Lawley was speaking about his sign height, he's in a very similar situation that I am. So I'm not the only one.
And I did go out and look at your property, and it's at least the neighbors on either side of you as well that have the same issue, and maybe one or two more depending on which direction you go.
Yes.
So, Mr. Mayor, excuse me. So I guess the question is, and we had a quick discussion downstairs, similar nature, but what do we have to do as a city, obviously, to put in standards that are clear for staff to follow and clear for people to enforce, but figure out where there's those exceptions that cannot be reasonably controlled through policy because geography doesn't allow us to do it?
Let me elaborate on the amendments. Jeff was very brief in covering them. There are two changes to the fence and wall height standards. One applies to the front yard setback. Right now, you're capped at 3 feet in height. We're proposing to increase the height in the front yard setback to 4 feet on lots that are, 10,000 square feet or less, and then 5 feet on larger lots that are more estate-like properties. And that was driven by residents that have pets that like to they keep in the front yard and for privacy purposes. In a side or rear yard, which is beyond the face of the house, we're proposing that there be an avenue to consider fences and walls taller than 6 feet, similar to the process we use for the approval of administrative setback modification. So neighbors would be notified. There are standards of review to consider in granting the request, and our recommendation would be to extend that same process to increases in fence and wall heights. And where we're seeing the issue is in cases like this where they back up to an arterial roadway or properties that abut commercial uses. And there are circumstances that would warrant certainly, elevating the height beyond 6 feet. And then also gives the building department an opportunity where they're adding to an existing wall to verify that the structural strength of the existing wall can support 2 more courses of blocks. So that's our recommendation that's on the table.
I guess the essence of my question is, as far as our waiver policy goes, or our exception policy, is it flexible enough to account for the clear, in this case, where it's obvious that there's a bit of, I'm using you as an example, but there's a clear issue. Do you guys have the ability to go in, identify it, bring it back to council as a policy decision or something and say, hey, we got 99% of it, but here's the one. How do we fix those types of issues?
With respect to fences and walls?
All this code that we're passing, yeah.
That's the process that we're...
The homeowner would basically have to identify the issue and bring it to you and go through which process?
The administrative modification
process, so we can
which
have the other 2 feet.
involves neighbor notification, and there's an application with criteria that are considered and granting the request.
Now, I will tell you, in this particular case, the cause of it was the installation of, or I should say the widening of Charleston Road.
Sure.
And it should have been taken care of that time, and it was an oversight. But again, on a routine basis, that's how you would do it.
Right.
I asked, I actually asked quite a few years ago for an exemption, and I was told that it would not be allowed because then other people would also be able to build to that wall height.
That's the variance process,
Yes.
which is very straight. What we're proposing is a different process that's administratively reviewed and approved on a different set of criteria.
Thank you.
Chuck, did you want to say something?
The point I want to make in this particular case, Mr. Mayor and members of the council, is that this particular area on Charleston, because public funds are being expended, these will actually be city-owned walls, and I believe, under that scenario, we have flexibility as well.
Excuse me.
Go ahead.
No, there's, to bring it back around, since it's kind of, I think, in the same nested situation. Obviously, after the code signed, we're getting phone calls, we're talking to people. The code about raising the signs up. But one of the things that's there is when they understand the variance process is different. So what we're suggesting, and forgive my ignorance, is that there's another process set up that would be less stringent than the variance process. I guess what I'm trying to figure out is if we have people who show up with a real concern and it's something because of a policy that we set, do we have the mechanism in place to bring that back in front of council to say that there has to be an exception, there has to be a variance? Because, and it's not just this case, there's been a couple others where they've told me, and they said, we brought it in, we tried to get an exception or a variance, and then it's compared back to the same standard and said the exact same thing that's said here, that we can't go against the standard, and that's our fault because we passed it. Do you guys have the tools, and does council have the ability to hear these exceptions and these variances as they come up so that we can proactively or incrementally improve the standard or to make it more ideal for the people who are the exceptions? Does this what we're passing today allow you guys to do that?
The expansion and flexibility will apply to fences and walls and setback relief in the urban infill incentive district. Right now on new construction. So right now the setback, the administrative modification process applies only to setback relief to side and rear yards for existing developed single-family homes in the city. So there is additional flexibility that's being requested through these amendments that we think will provide an avenue for those aggrieved owners to reach a better outcome without having to change the rules for everybody.
Thank you.
I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but I think what Mr. Mount is getting at is if I've asked for a variance and I go through the established process and I get told no, and I still think I have a valid need, valid concern, valid whatever, my next step is to do what?
Appeal to the city council.
See, so they can come and appeal to us, right?
But the findings of fact that are considered are actually reviewed by an administrative law judge. So you would have to find that he erred in his consideration of the request against the established review criteria. It's not a legislative judgment. It's a quasi-judicial judgment.
But again, what happens is if we have more than one of these cases going on, then I think the concern is we need to be aware of it. So if we need to change the code or change the ordinance, and then we would do that.
Right. And that's why we as staff initiated amendments.
Okay. Because I think that's what you were getting at. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay. So we're back on the code. Discussion, other discussion, comments. Well, that's going to be quick. I'm going to call for the question. All those in favor? Opposed? It's unanimous. Thank you very much. We now move on to item number 7. Ms. Ash.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move that ordinance 2018-003, city-initiated amendments to the city code sections Chapter 93 and 150 be approved.
Second. It's been moved and seconded. We have one individual who would like to address us on this item. Mr. DiCarlo.
Good evening, Mayor, Council, and staff. Since this is on noise, and I was talking to you earlier about electromagnetic radiation, also classified as noise, perhaps we could add that into this project here. And we could go out and spend a lot of money on buying spectrum analyzers so that we can measure each of these transmission stations to make sure that the people that are living in these neighborhoods aren't getting high doses of RF radiation, which, if you go give a radar a hug, will make you sterile and you won't be able to procreate. I say that from my life. My oldest daughter's adopted, and my youngest daughter, I spent $10,000 to do in vitro. So I don't know how that adds up in being a submariner and then later in life figuring that out, but I'm just trying to caution you a little bit here. If it's noise, it's more than sound. It's a wave, a sound wave out of my mouth, electromagnetic wave off of a antenna, my voice going to this microphone here, being changed to electrically and then put in speakers around here. It's all manipulation of energy. And what we're doing is we're creating a transceiver that, I mean, a second's this long, half a second's this long. This thing's working this fast, okay? So it's always, 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 always transmitting. And I think versus a noise amendment, maybe we should add electromagnetic radiation to it, since we were forced to put antennas in our residential neighborhood. Thank you very much for your time, Mr. Mayor, Council.
Thank you, Mr. DiCarlo. Make it quick, Andre. Come on up.
You have a Fort Huachuca that always needs boots on the ground, and there are rascals running around using those kind of devices that he was just warning you about their effects. And that Fort Huachuca is a fence game where you have absolutely no authority to go up there and find out who's doing it. And I think you should have remembered what he said. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Newcomb. We'll next ask staff report, please. Did we get you already? Okay, staff report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. The staff report would be the same as the last ordinance, so there are no additional comments on these amendments.
Any questions for Mr. Pregler? Okay, thank you, Mr. Pregler. Discussion. Yes, sir.
And discussion. I know that we talked a little bit about it during the work session. I don't think that at least my concerns are alleviated with the code enforcement officers being able to issue criminal misdemeanors. We can talk about that a little bit as a council. I'll wait. I've got a motion prepared to at least suspend that piece of it to allow everything else to move forward. I guess some of the things beyond the questions and other concerns that we had, Chief, you made a comment when you were kind of walking through the criminal misdemeanor process, and I'll paraphrase it, but if I'm wrong, please let me know. That was, if you cite me with a criminal misdemeanor, a citation, and then when I sign it, I'm released on my own accord, and that's basically saying that I'm going to show up in court.
That's correct. What you're signing on any citation that you get, both civil and criminal, is that you're promised to appear in court.
What if I refuse to sign it?
Then you are booked into jail.
Okay, so
A police officer, a certified police officer in the state of Arizona would have to book you into jail.
Okay, if a code enforcement officer tries to cite somebody a criminal misdemeanor citation and I refuse to sign it, what happens?
They would call us to take care of it.
Mr. Mayor, I don't know if now's the time.
Well, can we ask anybody else any other discussion? Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Again, I watched the work session on Tuesday, and I appreciated the concerns and questions that were raised by my colleagues. And in the vast majority of cases, I would agree with the dissension here. We wouldn't want library employees, no offense, citing criminal misdemeanors. At the same time, we wouldn't want code enforcement officers citing for speeding tickets. But I think we need to recognize what the circumstances are currently as they exist right now. So stop me if I'm wrong at any point here, but from what I heard, one, our police officers are already relying largely on the information that's been brought in the cases that have been built by code enforcement officers. That's not changing. Two, our code enforcement officers and police officers are in constant contact with our city attorney throughout the process. That's not changing. Three, we need to be clear in that we're not actually talking about changing standards of performance, accountability measures, means of recourse, appellant rights. That's not changing. So the question that I have that I think is relevant here is, what value does having a police officer get pulled off of duty to essentially go to code enforcement officer 101 add to the process that our city attorney doesn't add. And if I think that that answer is nothing, because we're not talking about changing any of those things. So if we want to have a conversation about standards or accountability or anything like that, I'm open to that conversation, but I don't think this can reveal, further conversation can reveal anything else that's changing about the process. So in closing, I feel that, again, pulling police officers off of their normal duty is not the right thing to do in this case. We need to keep our police officers out, keeping our community safe, and have our code enforcement officers do what they're trained to do.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
There was another relevant comment made, I believe I have it correct, that the animal control folks also are given the authority to cite for misdemeanors. Am I saying that correctly?
Yes, that's correct. So the animal control officers have the authority to cite criminal city code violations, as well as very specific state law that's defined in the state law but they have to be given authority by the council, which has been done in the past. So our animal control officers have these abilities right now, and they are civilian employees as well.
Also not uniformed.
They are, yeah, they have uniforms, but they're not sworn officers in the state of Arizona.
Thank you. The other thing that caught my attention in the conversation was that the police officer doesn't have the breadth of knowledge that the resource officer has, so that he would rely solely, and I wasn't clear on, could he just sit there and talk to the resource officer and get all that information and then feel comfortable making the citation?
That is correct. So they would, we don't enforce obviously these codes very often as police officers. So they would be relying on the code officer to tell them exactly what went on. And again, they would also be probably talking with the city attorney to be clear that there is probable cause to issue a citation for a criminal misdemeanor, because the officer is the one that is signing that citation that there is probable cause and making the charge. So under federal law, police officers have limited immunity for their actions. So they have to be sure that they believe that they have probable cause. So they would spend probably some time with the code enforcement officers to make sure that they have all the elements of the code covered.
Okay, thank you. That just kind of echoes, I think, what Ms. Ash was saying. So from clarification for me. So thank you, and thank you.
Ms. Wolf.
I think I've said it before, and I guess I'll just say it again. I think it is an overreach for us to allow the city code enforcement officers to do a criminal misdemeanor. I still believe, and I fully believe, that it should be done by the police department. I have asked before, and I think he just reiterated that it's a very rare occurrence that this happens. And in that rare occurrence, I think just for numerous reasons, even just safety reasons, that a police officer should be on scene.
Thank you. Mr. Mount.
Yeah, Mr. Marin, thank you for hitting back. There was, with respect, I know you closed your part of the discussion down and didn't want to go further with the discussion, but I think that what's critical to your argument is the fact of rarity, and by staff's own recommendation, this is a rare circumstance. And so now it comes back down to the idea that if it's a rare circumstance, then why are we making the change? And then if we're making the change and it's to make it easier for a member of the public to be labeled criminal, I don't know if this is the type of reason to make it easier, whether or not it's to enforce the code or not. I think
we don't assign the label. All these cases go before a judge.
Okay.
Oh,
well,
excuse me. I'm sorry.
If we make it more efficient for that to go forward, I will side with Ms. Wolf on this. I know she's got far more legal training than I do and has seen this. But I think also that there's a level of courtesy and respect that we give to the public, that we allow uniformed police officers to be the ones who are the legitimate law enforcement authorities in our community. And right now, what we're talking about is law when we talk about a criminal misdemeanor citation.
I just want to make a quick comment here. I don't think you meant to infer that the purpose, one of the purposes of the cities was going to be to make people criminals.
Well, no, I mean, just the general
but again,
process should be.
it came out that way, the way you stated that, and I think.
Then I correct.
I think we need to make sure that we enforce. We're charged with enforcing the codes and ordinances of the city, and the intent is obviously not to turn people into criminals. But
perfect.
If that that process occurs, it occurs, and that includes whether it's arrest by a police officer, an animal control officer, or any other appointed officer.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I would just like to add that the fact that these cases are rare doesn't mean that when they do happen, well, I should say, when they do happen, we're still having an unnecessary duplication of work. And the fact that we're having a police officer tag along for the process, I think it's a false reality. I already went through the points that had already been mentioned. It's already been clearly stated that there are going to be cases where a police officer is going to be necessary. And I think that we need to be considering the people who have to live next to these dilapidated houses. And again, if we want to have a conversation about accountability, means of recourse, I'm open to that conversation. If our standards are bad, having a police officer there is not going to make the process any better. So again, if we want to have that conversation, I'm fine with it. But based on the circumstances now, I see no reason to continue to allow continue to force police officers to be a part of the problem.
Part of the process.
Part of the process.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Mayor, well, I do think it warrants further discussion because I'm not understanding the logic behind it. It's a rare case, and it's already got a process in place to solve the problem. There's already a process that's there that enables that specific problem. If it's somebody who's got such a degree of disrespect to their neighbors that they're going to get cited with criminal misdemeanors, that process exists today. And so if the process already exists today, and it's a rare occurrence, and it would ultimately require a police officer to show up anyways if I refuse to sign the sheet, then the only thing that we're banking on is that the code enforcement is able to convince the person who is already at odds and has already reached that point to sign it without the police officer there. And I think that that would be in of itself an assumption and a stretch of logic because we've already reached the point where we're issuing criminal misdemeanor citations. So I don't understand the logic that this somehow alleviates the need for a police officer. If anything, I think it compounds it because you have somebody showing up who's not got any sort of look, when we talk about power, and I'll speak about this all day, you know, we talk about legitimate power and how it influences decisions. There's a reason why our police officers wear uniforms. There's a reason why. And I think that having somebody who's trying to administer to me, and I'll just use me as an example, if somebody just walks up and says, hey, you're out of compliance and I'm going to charge you with a criminal misdemeanor, I need you to sign this, I'm like, no way, go get a cop. I don't know who you are. I don't care if you work up here at City Hall or not. And that's just me using some common sense beyond the logic that I just laid out. So
that's not the way it occurs.
Well, but that's what will happen.
If our standards are bad, that's what but we're not having that conversation.
Okay.
The other thing I'll mention is before it gets to the point where there's a criminal citation considered, in most cases there's been 2 or 3 times, and they're very well familiar with the officer or the code enforcement officer. So.
Well, I also don't see a need to carry this on, but perhaps it would be helpful if, for Mr. Mount, if the police department could talk about how it works with the animals. I mean, it seems very similar to me that what did you call it? Unsworn, unsworn officer can can issue a citation. Seems to me to be a very similar situation. Could you say something?
It is a
more
very
about-
similar situation, and there are times where a police officer does have to assist an animal control officer, both because the person refuses to sign or because of the arguments that take place as part of this. But the vast majority of the time when they do it, which is actually very rare, just like in the case in this particular instance, the animal control officers work with them repeatedly over to get compliance before they're going to have to go to a criminal citation. It is rare now that they actually use the police department to issue the misdemeanors. We get involved typically in felony animal abuse cases where they are not allowed to deal with that, and then it would come to the police department.
The thing that impresses me in the whole situation, both situations, is those officers, or the resource officer or the animal control officer, builds a relationship with that person that they're working with. And I don't think they're always negative relationships. It's sort of, this is the way I like to have it. Well, this is the city, the code or the ordinance. And at this back and forth for that period of time. And then it reaches a point where an action has to be taken. But I think what's important to me in this situation is the relationships that develop, and then they only get really, really bad ever so often. Otherwise, it works the way you're proposing and the way it's already working for animal control. So because of that, I'm in agreement with it.
So, Mr. Mayor, I guess this will be the time. I think that there's obviously, look, everything else that's in this is great, and the work that you've done with the code has been fantastic, Matt. What I would still ask is for us to pull this part out, even temporarily. Let's go back out, let's talk to the public a little bit, and find out exactly who we represent, and find out where they stand, and just dislodge this piece from the rest of this, because I think everybody else is in agreement with the rest of this, and I don't want to hold that part up. So, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to move to amend Ordinance 2018-003 by removing the proposed amendments to the City Code Section 150.37, the authority to issue criminal complaints, as shown on Exhibit A.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion?
Oh, we got it.
Can you tell a joke while we?
Well, I can, but I'm not sure. I'm prepared. We're gonna.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
So when would this come back to council?
Well, if it's amended without the code, it would obviously everything else goes in the code. The amendment would have to come back. We'd have to provide some type of additional guidance to staff, and it can come back at any time. Matt, when would you see scheduling this?
Well, I think you can strike out the amendment and still approve the ordinance.
Well, that's what we plan on.
Right.
That's the motion on the floor. That's the motion on the floor.
Okay.
So the question you're asking is when do we revisit the part that may be amended out?
Yes.
Give me 30 days.
Well, if it was amended out, why couldn't you approve it absent that amendment tonight?
Well, we are going to do that.
No,
the question is the issue.
I'm sorry,
The issue we're
failing to
discussing.
understand.
I'll back off here a little bit. The issue we're discussing that requires further discussion would be Section 150-37.
The code
Not
enforcement.
included. If it's not included in the code tonight, we would need to have further discussion about that. And obviously, we're going to continue to operate as we're operating now without it in the code.
We would
but
just-
if we wanted to change, we came to another agreement as to how we can better change it, the question is when will we have that discussion?
Well, that'd be
And
up
it's
to
really,
us.
Well,
it's
we-
really up to
we
us.
would need
It's really up to us to decide where we're going to
direction
put it
on
yeah.
how to improve the
Yeah,
amendment.
we would have to have an
To me,
agenda
it's an
item.
either or.
Agenda item for the.
I agree with that.
work session, and see if we can come to a guidance for staff. Sir.
Mr. Mayor, I recommend then, if this were just to get removed, so I'm only asking for the one part to get taken out, everything else go forward, which is what I just motioned out. And Ms. Ash, to your question, give me 30 days, just so I can go out and really talk to the public and make sure that maybe I'm wrong, but I'd like to really know that I'm wrong before I go out and sign off on this type of power. That's what I ask.
And that's in addition to the 30 days, because it went out for, they're going out for 30 days public hearing.
Yeah, but this is, but Mr. Mayor, with respect, these codes, and we've seen this. I mean, if we took our guidance based on the codes, the public input on all the codes that we've passed or changed, we would have had, we wouldn't have had the food truck thing. We wouldn't have had. I mean, I agree with you. The public should comment, but this is also buried in a lot of code, and I just want to make sure that it's talked about independently. That's all.
Okay. And we'll get started here in a minute. Any other comments? All right, then. There's a motion on the floor to amend the motion. It's actually, the motion is to amend the motion by eliminating section 150-37. Is there any further discussion? Seeing no further discussion, I'll call for the question. All those in favor of amending the resolution by removing 150-37, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The amendment fails. We now go back to the ordinance as written, or the motion, or the ordinance as written. Any comments, questions on the ordinance as written? Seeing none, I'll call for the question. All those in favor? Opposed? It passes 4-2. Thank you very much. And there's no reason we can't continue discussion on the issue as well. Okay, we're now up to item number 8. Ms. Wolf.
Mr. Mayor, I move that Resolution 2018-014, appointment of Nandor Felsen and Carly Scarborough to the Library Advisory Commission, said terms to expire December 31st, 2019, be approved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any comments? Okay, I'll call for the question. All those in favor? Opposed? It passes unanimously. If you're in the audience, congratulations. We're looking forward to working with you. Okay. Next item is call the public. We don't have anybody else that wants to address us tonight. So we'll go to comments and requests of council. And tonight we'll start with Ms. Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm very excited that we should now, with any luck, have a quorum for the Library Commission. We still do have open spots for a lot of commissions, so if you're interested in being part of the city, and I think we do this call every single time we have a meeting, because we really mean it, please come out. Secondly, I just want to say, if you are interested, Mr. Charles Hancock will be speaking at the library about Black History Month and African Americans in the time of war at noon at the library, and that is 100% an awesome presentation to attend, and I would really encourage you to do so.
When
Thank
is that?
you. It is going to be at noon at the library.
Tomorrow?
On Saturday.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wolf. Mr. Mount.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I thought this was a really good session, and one of the things that I've learned in my now starting our 4th year sitting up here is we don't always get what we want, and the debate will continue and the discussion will continue, and I think it's having that discussion is crucial. I also hope that as the public starts to pay attention to the decisions that are made, that they understand the value of public comments. I think for us, and maybe it's me, so I won't speak for the council, but maybe for me, maybe what I continue to look for as I've evolved and grown sitting up in this seat is the clear indication of compromise on some of these decisions. And I feel that maybe it's me, and I don't think that I've ever operated from a zero-sum mentality. I've always looked for a place of compromise on most of these issues, whether it was the bike rack, the tiered tax system, some of these other things that just didn't go through, is where do we find the compromises that allow us to find kind of the sweet spot and to be a little bit more flexible and a little bit more adaptable, or maybe a little bit more patient as we start to really go out and talk and talk and talk. I know that sometimes we get buried down, especially coming off of a break, with the amount of work that actually does go on with this job. And I think we all agree there's a lot of work that comes in reading. In this case, probably, several dozen different codes and lots and lots of paper. I hope that as we go forward, because I know we have some other issues that are coming up that the community is definitely vested in, that it's not just council trying to convince each other that it's zero sum, take it or leave it. I don't think that's the case. But as these other issues start to come in, that maybe we do try to be a little bit more prone to compromise in finding out what we can do to make as many people happy and not have it maybe be as divisive. I'll give you an example. The sign code, I appreciate what Matt and Jeff very haphazardly, in my fault, kind of threw out there as an alternative. I think that's a good compromise that the council should consider. I know that we have the chicken up, and I know that the young ladies who've put that together have really shown up and compromised and compromised and compromised a lot to get to the point where it's even 1 or 2 chickens. And I hope that as that discussion goes forward, that we, again, don't fall to zero sum and look at the compromise that's there. With that being said, I know we still have a long year. There will be a lot of other opportunities, and I appreciate council's continued discussion and support in all of these. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mount. Mrs. Calhoun.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, I'd like to thank Father Greg for his opening invocation. I believe that's called an invocation. But in addition to what you had to say for us, Father, and it was very thoughtful, but most of our, the pastors and ministers that come to us really offer us some great support and uplifting thoughts about what we do. And I truly appreciate that. In addition, I wanted to thank Mr. Lawley, Mr. DiCarlo, and Mr. Newcomb for their comments tonight. All the comments that we receive, as Craig mentioned, all of them are heard, read, and we do our best with the information that we get from the public and from our own knowledge and our own sense of what we feel is important for our community. We take all that information and then we make our decisions. And I tell you, it's really nice to have the input from the public. We lean heavily on that, and as I said, and also on many other ways of getting information to help us make our decisions. So I think that covers everything I had to say, probably. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Calhoun. Mr. Blanchard.
I have nothing.
Thank you, Mr. Blanchard. Mayor Pro Tem Ash.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just have 2 things. One, I would like to congratulate Buena High School for securing their bid to host the Arizona Associations of Student Councils annual state convention in 2020. I read that in the newspaper this morning. So what's so wonderful about this event is, get this, between 1,600 and 2,000 people are going to be traveling to Sierra Vista to stay in hotels, eat at our local restaurants. So big congratulations to them. And they also get $160,000 to host the event.
Oh, wow.
Which is very
That's
cool.
great.
Go Colts. I would also like to sincerely thank Councilman Craig Mount, I think I can do this, for helping me in my time of need and agreeing to take over Arts and Humanities Commission. You're still good for that? Thank you.
You're
I
welcome.
appreciate it.
No problem.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Ash. I just want to thank everybody for coming tonight, staff and council. The attorney has asked us to make a quick comment about one of the items tonight, just for our own edification, if you would, sir.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, members of council. I just wanted to I know we're running long, but I think it's important that we point out tonight you adopted Ordinance 2018-001 as an emergency measure. Generally, for emergency measures to pass and to have effect, that requires 75% of the elected officials to vote for that measure. In this case, that would require 6 council members.
We didn't pass it then.
Well, technically, yes. However, luckily for us, Arizona courts have delineated between legislative acts and administrative acts of councils. Legislative acts are referable, subject to that 30-day referral period. Administrative acts are not referable. They take effect immediately. One of the definitions of an administrative act is when a state law or other regulating body requires the city or town to adopt certain rules or certain ordinances, which this would fall under. So this would fall under the administrative acts provision or the administrative acts realm of things as opposed to the legislative acts. So technically, no emergency measure was necessary. I just wanted to make sure that was clear on the record, so there was no confusion if this was ever looked at in the future.
So bottom line, it passed.
Yes.
And it were legal.
Yes.
Okay. All right. That's always good to hear. All right. With that, again, I want to thank everybody for being here. I appreciate the discussion and appreciate the comments from the public. As Mr. Mount said, we need to have more involvement from the public so we can get it right. Seeing nothing else before the council, meeting is adjourned.